Hi everyone, it's Anna again from Kit and Kat, and I thought we would try another sew along. This one will be shorter than the last one. We're not going to do the complete outfit, but I kind of wanted to show you some ideas for customizing or adding design elements to a pre-existing pattern. And the pattern I have today is actually for the rainbow high dolls, those kind of short 10.5-inch dolls, the fashion dolls, the play line. And the pattern includes a pair of skinny jeans with pockets and a blouse. And we've got our pattern here. And the blouse, as you can see, is just a kind of a generic long sleeve with a cuff. This one has kind of an exaggerated Peter Pan collar on it, and it's just a straight back, so you could either put snaps or Velcro, or if you intend to display the doll like a custom doll or one of a kind, you could just tack that button placket down. And our pattern pieces. This one includes options for a separate facing or a self-facing front, and that's kind of important because that can help us decide the placement of our embellishments or that. And the material we're using today is a soft white or cream white cotton lawn. It's a nice thin cotton, so I think it'll drape well for the shirt. And then we're going to try several different techniques. One of them is using this insertion lace as a decorative element. And let me pull that so you can see it. And it's a double-sided lace. Okay. Typically, the first thing we would do would be cut out and pin our pattern pieces. But one of the embellishments I want to try is to make this look more like a tuxedo shirt. And for that, I want to have those little tucks or pleats on either side of the button. Now, one way to do this would be to redraw the pattern and include the extra material, the space that I would need for all of those, and then cut that out. But there is another way to do this. What I can do instead is measure out how much material I would need top to bottom, and then just cut a strip that's a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. And I would measure, like I need 2 fronts, so I would want twice this length, and I would want the facing length because I want to add those stripes to either side of the front. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut a length of this material up. I will need to press this flat. And that should be more than enough. I'm going to press this flat, and I'm going to press the first pleat into the fabric, and I'm actually going to do it lengthwise. Okay. So what I'll do, and I'll get my iron out, is I'm going to fold the first fold, and I want to make sure it is straight and on the grain. And I can use my salvage edges to kind of help with that. And I can use my pen gauge, you know, to kind of make sure that that straight edge is straight and it's straight with the grain. And then I will sew my first stitch about a little less than 1/8 of an inch from the folded edge. That will be my first tuck. I'll then press it open so that the tuck lays toward the bulk of the fabric. I'll then press back and sew my next line. Press it open again, so I'll have my third tuck, or my second tuck rather, and then I'll do it a third time. So I will have a strip of fabric that will have 3 stitch lines down it, making 3 tucks. And then I'll cut out my pattern piece, putting those tucks where I want them on the side of where the buttons are, which would be the center front. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, pull the iron out, I'll go ahead and iron, and then I'll show you what that strip of fabric looks like. We have our 3 small tucks, and like I said, between each one I did press it with my iron. And when I go to place my pattern pieces, I will place them so that the tucks are on the side, and probably try to include them so that they fall in this collar area. So there are other options for creating some detail and embellishment on our pieces. Besides doing the pin tucks, that's probably the easiest. Another option is to take our water-soluble marking pen, and we want to line up our ruler with the grain of the fabric, and we're just going to make a line. And it doesn't have to be a very dark line, just enough that we can see to pin. And we can add a lace or a trim right along that line. And I'm just going to stitch this down the middle with a small stitch. And again, place that because I can see through my tissue paper, and I can have a lace front on my blouse. Using the same idea of drawing the line and pinning, I can also use, if my sewing machine has a decorative stitch, it might make the line a little bit more pronounced. And I could sew a scallop along this stitch, and that would give me a decorative edge. Or I could use a twin needle and do what's called a pin tuck. And that's where you have 2 top needles and 2 top threads, but 1 bottom thread. The bottom thread pulls the 2 lines of stitching made by the 2 needles on top, and it creates kind of a small raised bump. And that would look similar to this, but I would do 1 pin tuck down the center and then use that as a guide for pin tucks on either side. Now, I'm showing this for a shirt front, but if you had a skirt pattern that's just a solid straight piece for the skirt, this is how you can add pin tucks, or in tucks like this, these little pleats. Very easy to the bottom of the material, and then line up your pattern over top. So you don't have to do any math. It's just really a matter of your placement of your piece. I'm going to do a couple of different versions. I'm going to do the lace, I'm going to do the embroidery, and then I have these pin tucks, and then I'm going to show you how we pin out and do what we call fussy cut. So we have our 3 different types of embellishment. We have our stitched lace, and I just did a zigzag in the center so that the sides of the lace are loose. We have our, I want to call them tuxedo tucks, and I just did kind of a diamond embroidery stitch, just a single line on this piece, just as an example. And we're ready to start adding our pieces. I'm going to go ahead and cut out my fronts. I'm going to cut out my single front, although I could use either or. Now, for my lace and my tux, it's pretty simple. I want my pleats to fall away from the center of the button. So, for my first piece, I'm gonna lay it, and I'm gonna go ahead and use the fold line as kind of, and the grain line as kind of my guides for making sure that the tux runs straight up and down. And I'm gonna use this little corner here where the collar meets the shoulder. And I'm gonna slide that in just a teeny bit. That way I don't have any of my tuck inside the shoulder seam. It'll just be on the collar front. And I'm gonna pin that. Now, if it helps you, because this is a solid and it's a white fabric, it might be kind of hard to keep track of which side is which. You can take your little fabric marker and write like an L and an R on the pieces. I'm going to use the same pattern piece. For my lace, what if I decide I want to get really fancy with this? I want some lace on my sleeve. It's the same idea. I take this. Now my sleeve has a center guideline to let me know where the shoulder is and the center for the cuff. So I can use that as my guide. And again, just pin it. And cut out my sleeve as usual. This would be a really easy way in 1/3 scale if you wanted to try to make like a lace insertion blouse, because you could do all of your lace insertion to create your piece and then come back and cut out the complicated pieces that make up the bodice or skirt or whatever your project is. And this, I know that the lace is centered on the sleeve and I don't have to try to attach it later or embellish the sleeve later. Well, if I do one, I guess I need to do the other sleeve. flip my pattern reverse. Again, pin it in place. I think this technique also kind of shows the value of using tissue paper rather than using the copy paper, because I can see my piece below. And maybe I want to do an asymmetrical front. I've got the lace on the sleeves. Do the lace down one side of the front. Asymmetrical blouse with the lace detail. Now, the embroidery. I could do the same thing, have the embroidery run close to the button edge on the placard, or what if I decide I want some detail on my cuffs? I know that this is the fold line, which is the bottom edge of the cuff, and this is the seam line, that 1/8 of an inch seam line. So I would place my pattern so that that little embroidery runs between those two lines. Have enough, I can go ahead and do the front. I'm going to go ahead and cut out the rest of the pieces to the blouse, and then show you the order of construction for this blouse. Now, this technique, because it's all straight lines, works really well for the length of a garment or across the garment, but for our collar, it probably wouldn't work because our collar is a curved piece on the outside. So it would be kind of hard to get the design to line up. But if you had a straight collar, you could probably do like the embroidery stitch or maybe the ribbon, and it would still work. So what you see here, guys, is I went ahead, pinned, cut out all the additional pieces I needed to make the shirt, and I used my fray check on the edges, and I use an old mat, kind of keep my favorite clean. What I'm going to do next is, the order of operations for this shirt is to sew your collar, and it's a rounded Peter Pan collar. we're using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance for 1/6 scale, and I'm just going to sew around the outer edge of the collar pieces to sew those together. Now I think we will have this pattern available on our Etsy shop, KitnKatShop.com. There is a category for rainbow high patterns, and in the instruction sheet, since I've already done the pattern sheet, I'm going to go ahead and include the other collar. It's just a typical pointed one-piece collar, so you'll have that option as well. So we'll sew our collars, we'll turn them right side out and press them. Now with these curves, I will want to do some release cuts just so that I can get a good nice smooth curve out of those. I'm also going to, on my sleeves, these are set-in sleeves, but we do them a little bit different. So I'm going to go ahead and put a hand basting stitch across the cap and across the bottom, because the bottoms gather into the cuffs. So I'll prepare those, and then for the main body of our shirt, we need to sew the shoulder seams so that we can then later set in our sleeves. So when we come back, because like I explained in my previous sew along, right now I've just got the one camera and it's kind of hard to go back and forth, and honestly seeing me actually sew the pieces, it's kind of hard to see that part. So when we come back, we'll have our collars sewn, turned right side out and ready to be set. Our sleeves will have their gathering stitches, and our shoulder seams will be done. So I went ahead and sewed the fronts to the backs, and I pressed the shoulder seams open. And as you can see, our tucks are going to be in the collar, not in the shoulder seam. And there's our little embroidered pieces. So our next thing to do is to prepare the sleeves. Our collars have been sewn, turned right side out and pressed. And I did the basting along the sleeve cap and the cuff. Now this shirt pattern has a cuff, so what I want to do is I want to match the ends of the cuff to the sides of the sleeve. And my little gathering stitch, that's where that comes into play, because there is some slight gathering to that sleeve to the cuff. It doesn't match perfectly, as you can see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish my sleeves at the bottom, and then I'm going to set the sleeves into the armhole. And that's why I have this little gathering stitch here, because I'll have my finished sleeve cuff, and then I'll sew that into the armhole, press that out, and I'll have like a little star-shaped piece. And when that's done, then we'll sew in our collar, and I'll show you that when we come back. So we're going to go ahead and get our sleeves finished and set in. I'm back after setting in my sleeves and finishing my cuffs. The cuffs are matched right side with the bottom of the sleeve, and then you stitch, and then I fold it over to the inside, and it overlaps that seam allowance, and just a top stitch holds that in place. And because we did use the fray check, I don't have to worry about that interior edge. So that finishes the sleeve cuffs on each of the blouses. And then to set the sleeves, I match the center of the sleeve to the shoulder seam and the ends of the sleeve to the underarm. Now I find that with the really small scale, the 1/6 scale, it's easier for me to hand sew the sleeves in place and I just use a little small back stitch. And because I'm doing it by hand, I can actually kind of shape the sleeve cap around my finger, kind of like a sewing ham, or a pressing ham rather, so that I can kind of avoid too many, any large pleats in the sleeve. Now, since I have my sleeves in, I am ready to add my collar. And our collar's 2 pieces. When it comes to turning the collar right side out, I'll actually take my mister bottle and I'll just dampen the piece. And then when I turn it right side out, I find that I can use a paintbrush or my tweezers to kind of shape those corners, or to shape the points in the other collar version. So to pin our collar, I need to find the center of the collar, and that's going to get matched to the center back of the shirt, and then that's going to get stitched around. And I tend to put a stitch, a pin here at the shoulder seam, and then it's going to come around to the front. Now this is our facing, and this is at the point that we finish the top of the facing, because we need that button placket. So we fold it back. It's not going to meet the edge of the collar. There's going to be a little bit of the shirt bodice that's going to extend out past the bottom of the collar, and that's because that's where our buttons are going to go, or our fasteners. So, but it will overlap the collar just a little bit, the facing will. Now this is the exact same steps that you would do for the dress shirt pattern for Smart Dolls. You may find that you're actually able to stitch the collar and the sleeves without having to do them by hand, because it's not going to be such a steep curve. And again, it doesn't fold at the end of the collar, but out just a little bit, because we need that overlap. And since I'm making multiple shirts today, I'm going to go ahead and pin all of my collars and sew them at once. And then when I turn it out, there'll be a little corner to push. And like I said, that's going to be because that's where the buttons go. We want that overlap on the front of the shirt. And then we'll be ready to sew from our shirt cuffs to our hem. Okay. Added my collar to the shirts, and we're getting right down to the very end. So once my collar has been sewn, I turn out the facings, and I go ahead and, in this case I used a pair of rounded tweezers, and point out that corner and kind of press down for the button placket. One of my last seams that I'm going to do on my sewing machine is going to be the side and sleeve seam. And what we do is we're going to match that cuff. We're going to match the armpit seam. That's where we sewed in our sleeve. And we're going to match the side hem sleeve. Okay. And we'll do that for both sides of the shirt. And we'll sew back stitching here to lock it all the way down, and then back stitch here. And that completes the side seams of the shirt. The only thing we'll have left to do after that is to press and sew our hem. And in this case, I think I'm just gonna press it up just that 1/4 inch. I might top stitch it, depends on how that works. And then our blouse will be ready to turn right side out, and we can add the buttons or snaps down the front and put it on our doll. So when you see this blouse next, all the side seams will be completed. I'll turn the sleeves right side out, and I find it's easier to turn them out with like a hemostat or a clamp. I think is what it's called, a surgical clamp. So, and these are quite handy. They come in a variety of sizes. So I actually have some small ones. I have these, and I also have a really long pair for pulling through 1/3 scale pants. So our little sew along is complete. I had made the pants from the pattern previously, and I used a dark wash chambray, and they're ready for their little snap to go in the back and their pockets. I knitted this little purple sweater, short sleeve cardigan, which I need to finish blocking and sewing that together. And here is our front pleat shirt. It's been pressed, and that little pointed collar. So when I put it on the doll, in this case, because I'm probably not going to redress the doll, I'm going to go ahead and just use like little tack stitches and then glue like beads or studs over top to mimic buttons. And that's our pleated tuxedo shirt. Put a little bow at the top if I like. This one's the one that we put the lace on the sleeves. I think that would be cute under a jumper. And then this is the one that just has the embroidery. So this one's the simplest of the two. These two I didn't finish this bottom hem. I had sealed it and backstitched it. So I think to reduce bulk on the small size, the 1/6 scale, I'll go ahead and leave those unfinished. Since they're not going to be seen, they'll be tucked into a blouse or a dress. On the 1/3 scale, it's even easier. Like I said, the dress shirt pattern for Smart Doll, it's assembled the same way. Cuffs on the sleeves, set the sleeves into the shoulder seams, and then do the collar and our finishing. Now that one on the back, because there's not a lining on this one, you could put a little piece of ribbon or seam tape or a little strip of bias to kind of seal that back collar edge. I'm going to go ahead and finish this, dress the doll, and you guys can see how it compares to my sketch drawing. Now for the pattern for the jeans, the only difference for a rolled cuff is before you sew this inseam, which is your last seam, you just kind of fold back the legs, press them into place, and then catch that when you do that inseam stitching. Okay?